Pag-aralan yung ating napag-aralan yung nangyari kay Lot sa Sodom and Gomorrah. Ito yung nangyari doon pagkatapos ng gera. The king of Sodom, a city of sinful pleasure, then the Melchizedek, king of Salem, na nagpakita kay Abraham after ng war. Come out to meet Abraham. Then he offered, si Bira, yung king ng Sodom, he offered riches to Abraham. Of course, the allegiance too. But Melchizedek, he offered blessings to Abraham. And Abraham refused the offer of the king of Sodom. And Abraham accepted Melchizedek blessings. So Abraham returned all his riches and people to the king of Sodom. And Melchizedek, Abraham gave to him the tithes of all the spoil of the war. So Sodom or Bera represent the city of man. And Melchizedek offered represent the city of God. So as we see, there is always a so-called repetitions of history or story. The narrative in Genesis chapter 13 and verse 14 there are similarities. For example, begins with strife between the servant of Lot and the servants of Abraham. Now in chapter 14, there is a strife between the Elamite kings and the cities of the Jordan. Lot moved into Sodom. Lot is taken from Sodom. As a result of the strife, Abraham separates from Lot. As a result of the strife, Abraham goes to rescue Lot. Verse 13, after his separation from Lot, God came and make or confirm his promises to Abraham. And after Abraham rescued of Lot, Melchizedek came and he blessed Abraham. And God promises to give the land of Canaan to Abraham, was mentioned in chapter 13, but here Abraham gave tithes to Melchizedek. So there are always a similarity of, we will see that later on from the other story. But now we are in chapter 15, and this is the chapter 15 to chapter 17, verse 17. So this is the summary of what is happening in these chapters or passages of the scripture. So the Lord secured and confirmed the promises. So this is where, again, God told Abraham about the promises. So the Lord secured through specific promises to give him innumerable descendants through the symbolic ratifications of the covenant. So God made a covenant with Abraham through promising to bless Abraham's seed through Hagar in spite of Abraham's unbelief, by confirming the covenant by the rites of circumcision as a sign of obedience, faith, and by the change of the name for Abraham and Sarai to Abraham and Sarah. So that is the summary of these passages from chapter 15, verse 1 to chapter 17, verse 17. Verse 15, this is the God's promises, believing. If you could make a title for chapter 15, believing the promises of God. So here again, Abraham, God confirm and make assurance. So Abraham's son will be the heirs, and his descendant will be innumerable. So there is actually an issue here, because Sarah at this time, he has no children. And so God confirmed, and in verse 6, Abraham believed in that. So now he is preparing for, in verses 7 to 11 of chapter 15, he is preparing to make a sacrifice or ratifications of the covenant. God make a covenant with him, and so it should be ratified, and it is through the cutting of the animals. And that is usual things that they do in the Old Testament when they have a ratifications of covenant. So there is always the cut of animals. And so here in chapter 15, we see the verse 12 to 16, the promise history. What is this promise history? That Abraham's descendant will be enslaved for 400 years. But the Lord assured Abram that he will die in peace, and the promises will become true through a ratifications of covenant. That is in verses 12 to 16 and 12 to and so a promissory seal in chapter 15, 17, meaning this is now the Lord guarantees the certainty of the promises by unilaterally ratifying the covenant. So usually that's why in my mind, we ratify the Constitution by voting. But here, it is unilateral because it is God who make a ratification of the covenant. And this is about, and again, the Lord God repeated the promises of the promised land. So the Lord declared the declaration by naming the boundaries of the land and the disposed people. That is chapter 15, 18 to 21. Now 16, the birth of Ismael. So when Sarai and Abraham generated tremendous complication by their attempt to obtain an heir through the social customs of the day, a complication that caused Hagar to flee to the wilderness, the Lord showed himself faithful by responding to Hagar's affection, providing for her needs and promising her descendant through Abraham's son Ismael. And so here, chapter 16, the birth of Ismael. Now they have no children, so they have to God promises them to become a big nation, that his people, or through him, there be numerous, like the sun. No? But here is a detailed chapter 16, the plan of Sarai. Ano yung plano ng Sarai? Gusto niya matupad yung pangako ng Diyos, so binigyan niya yung kanyang katulong na si Hagar para magkaroon ng anak si Abraham. But there is a problem then. Nagsisilos din si Sarai. So there is a domestic strife. No? Kasi itong si naman, si Hagar, nagmamalaki na rin. No? So the solution in chapter 16, verse 6. So ang sabi ni Abraham, gawin mo ang dapat mong gawin sa iyong katulong. No? And that is what the solution, that the authority ay binigay pa rin kay Sarai. So si Hagar, he feel that he was maltreated, so he ran away. Where in verse 16, 7 to 9, he met the Lord. So the angel of the Lord found Hagar in the wilderness and instructed her to return. So, and there is a promise that his descendant will also grow through his son, Ismael. And that is true, no? Because they become a big nation later on. There are two nations that Ismael was a part of it. So, B6 chapter 16, here is the a summary of chapter 16. So Hagar encounters Sarai. That is chapter 1, 3. So there is a domestic strife between the two, Hagar and Sarai, and the solution of Abram and Hagar flight. He ran away in chapter verse 7. And there he countered God. So God instructed Hagar to go back to the angel. So probably they said that the angel probably is the God himself. So there is a promise there. Okay, so nagdalawa. So Hagar's son, his descendant will be innumerable. That is the promise of God when he encountered Sarai in the wilderness. Hagar, rather. Abraham here, his descendant will be innumerable. He will be Hagar's son. He will be an enmity with the world. And he will be a blessing to the world. That's the ear of Abraham. And Hagar's son, every man's hands will be against him. And whoever blessed him will be blessed, and whoever cursed him will be cursed. That is Abraham's ears. So here is again the comparative between 15 and 16. So there's as you said, there is some familiarity or similarity with the story of chapter 15 and 16. So 15 begins with God coming to Abraham with a message. This is the promises of God. So in Genesis chapter 16, Sarah begins with Sarai coming to Abraham with an advice. Get my slave so that God's promise will be fulfilled. Abraham believes the Lord. Here is the chapter 16. There is a little bit Abraham's faith was moved because he listened to the voice of his wife. And 15, God gave to Abraham the promise of protection of the seed and of the possessions of the land. Sarah gave Abraham her handmaiden or slave Hagar to fulfill the promise of the seed. You see, it is the promise of God. God will fulfill it. And Sarah intervened. God spoke to Abraham and gave him instructions and promises. Chapter 16, now it is Hagar that God spoke, and he gave instructions and promises. Abraham is a promise, a son who will be his heir in chapter 15. Hagar was promised a son who will be a wild man. He will also build his kingdom. So chapter 17, we go to chapter 17, actually is the Abrahamic covenant. So after the domestic problem, again, God spoke to Abraham and make a covenant. Verse 17. That's just repeated though of what God did in chapter 15. He ratified that covenant. But now, again, letter A, number 1, God's command to Abraham. Let me see that. I could not see it by text. Chapter 16, 17. So God commands to Abraham, and the same with the promises. And I will, verse 2, and I will establish the covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. So this is a personal promise to Abraham that he will become a big nation, actually. And there is a call there he said, walk before me. That is in verse 1. I am God Almighty, walk before me and be blameless. So this is a call like the writers of Genesis already told us, the one that to walk with God. Remember that similar terms that Moses used, the author of the book, Enoch walked with God. But here there is an invitation to Abraham, walk with me and be blameless and be pure. So here is a good sermon, walk with me. Then two things that you need to do with God. So then in verse, the name of Abraham, verses 3 to 8, his name was changed to Abraham. Here, let me see that. So he's changed his name, his patriarch name, Abraham. So the meaning of his name that he will become the father of multitude of nations. So the promise that he will be a big, his descendant will be numerous, there's a sign, his name itself, that he will become a father of multitudes of nations. So the Lord repeated the covenant promises of fruitfulness and inheritance, verse 6 to 8. You know? But there is a sign now of the covenant, and that is the circumcision. Remember, there is always a cut. A cut of the animal. Now there is a cut of the skin, which is a sign of covenant between God and Abraham. And in chapter 17, 15 to 16, then Sarah's name was changed to Sarah. So part of chapter 17 is with regards to Isaac and description of Isaac and Ismael, 19 to 21. So the Lord promised that Sarai will bear a son, Isaac, in verse 19. And God promised Ismael, the Lord promised to bless Ismael with abundant fruitfulness, including 12 princes, but reserved the covenant for Isaac. That is in the chapter 17, 20 to 21. So the chapter ends with Abraham's faithfulness. So the Lord will draw and Abraham obedience. Abraham obeyed the Lord's instruction to circumcise every male in his in his household, being circumcised himself on the same day as Ismael, his son. So there is a promise for an heir, and there is a promise for the other son, Ismael. So here is the summary of chapter 17, verse 1. So 99 years old as that's Abraham, so verse 1. So again, God appealed to Abraham, give him instruction. He will have in the promise to multiply himself, that he will multiply Abraham, then so on and so forth. You can see that now. I already mentioned that. So Abraham is 99 and Ismail at this time is 13 years old. In chapter 17, verses 24 to 25. So chapter 17 also, where you can read that when God told Sarai that he will have a son, he laughed. But God confronted him and said, no, I'm not laughing. Why should I? No? So anyway, again, there is a comparison between the Abrahamic covenant and the new covenant. So the sign of the covenant, the old covenant or Abraham covenant, is circumcision. The new covenant, the sign of the covenant is baptism. Circumcision was a sign of faith. Baptism is a sign of faith. So a physical circumcision represents the spiritual process of cutting away sin. Water baptism represents the identification with Christ and spiritual cleansing that comes through the new birth. Okay, so the circumcisions involve surgical cutting, represent the spiritual reality, circumcise then your heart and stiffen your neck no more. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 16. So it is a sign of spiritual, a sign of faith, a seal of righteousness of the faith which he had while uncircumcised. Paul wrote that in Romans chapter 4, verse 11. So circumcision was to Abrahamic covenant, what baptism is to the new covenant. And so here, last point here of the Abrahamic covenant, circumcision was limited to males. No? New covenant there is no distinction in baptism between male or female. So the promise was to God's people and the children and their children. Deuteronomy chapter 6, 6 and 7, and Acts chapter 2, verses 3, 38 and 39. So there is always a comparison of what is happening in the Old Testament and the New Testament by chapter. Now we go to chapter 18. And this chapter 18, verse 1 to chapter 19, verse 38. Chapter 18, let me see that. So this is the summary of our passage. Abraham intercede for the promise. When the Lord comes to announce the fulfillments of the promise, Abraham demonstrates his faith through hospitality and pleads with the Lord on behalf of the righteous in Sodom, but delivers Lot and his daughter, who subsequently engaged in incest and produced the ancestors of the Moabites and the Ammonites. So chapter 18, verse 1 to 15, the appearance of God to Abraham and the repetition or reiteration of his promise. He repeated his promise to provide the seed for him, the seed promise, again repeated in chapter 18. Then in chapters 18, verses 16 to chapter 38, there is now the Abraham intercession for Lot and his family, demonstrating God's protections of his elect in the destructions of Sodom and Gomorrah. So chapter 18 and 19 is about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Here, as we see, I think I made some of that. In verses 1 to 15 of chapter 18, chapter 18, verses 1 to 15, the Lord and the communal meal. And the Lord appealed to Abraham at Namri and shared a communal meal prepared by Patriarch and his household. So noon naghanda si Abraham ng pagkain, no? Bumisita yung Panginoon. No? Now the Lord appealed to him by the ox of Namri while he was sitting at the tent door in the head of the day. So Abraham carried the tent to Sarah and said, quickly prepare three measures of fine flour, knead it and make it bake a cake. And Abraham ran the herbs and took the tender and chose calves and give it to the servant and hurried to prepare it, and so on and so forth. So that is the last verse in 8. And he was standing by them under the tree as they eat. The last verse. Now, chapter 18, verse 2, when he lifted up his voice, nagkagulo, he looked up and three men were standing opposite him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, my Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. So here is three men. The scholar believe that these three men actually are the three persons of God. Meet with Abraham. And they will announce the destructions of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he said to him, where is your wife? 9 to 10. And he said, there's in the tent. He said, I will surely return to you at the next time year, and behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Sarah was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. So Sarah denied, however, saying, I did not laugh, and for he was afraid. Yes, he was actually laughed, or we didn't read it. But and so the verses 16 to chapter 19, verse 38, intercession for Lot and his family, demonstrating God's protection for his elect in the destructions of Sodom and Gomorrah. So the divine speeches, the three visitors contemplating the reason for telling Abraham about what will happen to the wickedness of Sodom. They will destroy it. So after the visit, Abraham escorted the three to their way. And Abraham would give him the blessings in verse 18. And verse 19, Abraham will be a teacher of righteousness. And verses 18 to 21, that is where the Lord now declared that he will destroy Sodom. So there is a negotiation in verses 22 to chapter 18, 22 to 33. So Abraham interceded for the city for the sake of righteousness. In this part, we know you learn that Abraham interceded for that people there. So in verse 19, this is in chapter 18, 31 to 32. And it said, suppose this is the negotiation or Abraham intercede in chapter 18. And he said, suppose 20 are found there. And he said, I will not destroy it on account of 20. And they said, oh me, the Lord not be angry. I will speak only this once. Suppose there are found there, 10 are found there. And he said, I will not destroy it on account of 10. But there is no 10 person righteous in Sodom and Gomorrah. So chapter 19, verses 1 to 38 is the judgments of Sodom, when the Lord destroyed the cities of the plain with fire and brimstone. And so here is the chart of what we studying now. Our passage, chapter 18, and chapter 18, actually 1 to 15, Abraham, 3 visitors, and verses 1 to 8, Abraham's hospitality for strangers. And then verses 9 to 15, God's prophecy, the destructions of Sodom. This is about the son, that he will have his son. And the blessing for Abraham and Sarah. The seed to come through a miracle. Bakit miracle? Because Sarah is already 90 years old when he gave birth to son Isaac. So verse 16 to 22, Abraham intercession, God's prophecy. This is the prophecy concerning the destructions of Sodom and Gomorrah. Chapter 18, verses 23 to 33, Abraham prayed for Lot. So the judgments on Sodom and Lot. So chapter 18 to chapter 33, seen to bring forth judgment. So chapter 18 and chapter 19, there is a similarity. No? 2 angels and the Lord met Abraham as he sat at the doors of his tent. Verse 19, 2 angels meet Lot as he sat at the gate of the city of Sodom. So the narrative begins in the head of the afternoon. The narrative takes up with the events of the same evening. Chapter 18, Abraham ran to meet them and bow down before them. In chapter 19, Lot is doing the same thing. He runs to meet them and bow down before them. It means the visitors of Abraham and Lot, they are part of the Trinity. Chapter 18, Abraham invited them to eat and rest for their travels. Chapter 19, Lot invited them to eat, spend the night in his house. So, nagkagulo doon sa panahon ni Lot, no? Kasi may mga lalaking gustong kunin yung dalawa. Chapter 18, they immediately accept Abraham's invitation. They initially refused that invitation, but as he insists, they reluctantly accept it. So chapter 18, Abraham interceded for Lot Lot intercede for behalf of the angels, meaning the two men, that his visitors. Chapter 18, Abraham is told of the impending judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah. Chapter 19, Lot is told of the impending destructions of Sodom and Gomorrah. Chapter 18, Abraham's wife expresses disbelief at the promise of God concerning the birth of a son. So Sarai laughed. Lot's wife expresses disbelief at God's warning not to look back at the dome of the city of Sodom. We know that the wife looked back. Chapter 18 culminates in the birth of the son. Chapter 19 culminates in the death of the city. 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 18 tell us that Lot, while living among them, filled his righteous soul tormented day after day with their lawless deeds. So he chose that place, the city of sin. Chapter 19, when this is now concerning the destructions of the city. When morning dawned, the angel urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishments of the city. But he hesitated. So the man seized his hand and the hands of his wife and the hands of his two daughters, for the compassion of the Lord was upon him, and they brought him out, put him outside the city. Pinilit pa, no? Si Lot. Then the Lord rained Sodom and Gomorrah, brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Verse 25, and he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the city, and what grow. So that's including animals and everything in the city. So now Abraham arose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah and towards all the land of the valley, and he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of the furnace. No? So Lot, Moab, and yes, a son, Moab and Ammon. Chapter 18, Abraham believed the promises of God. What that is promises, the seed. Chapter 19, Lot became fearful due to his unbelief. God gave Abraham a son through his wife. Lot has a two sons born through incest with his own daughter. Remember the history of Noah? Oh, that's not a good example anyway. Because here, Lot, wife died because he lumingon siya, no? Sabi sa kanya, huwag kang lumingon. No? Hindi siya naniwala. No? So he became a salt. So wala nang asawa sulot. So he want them, the daughter thought that at the end of the day, the end of the anything there. So they said they need to multiply. So they laid with their father. And their offspring were cursed. And that is actually the two, Moab and Ammon. That's their offspring. They become two big nation also. So Lot offspring was cursed in chapter 19, but in chapter 18, Abraham offspring were blessed. So chapter 18 is a picture one in a covenant relationship with God. Chapter 19 is a picture one's approaching life independently of God. So when you are not connected with God, this is what will happen to you. It's chapter 20 now. Chapter 20. So this is the summary of chapter 20. Abraham's scheme to protect the promise. God protect the marriage. When Abraham took Sarai to his harem because of Abraham's deception, God intervened to preserve Sarah purity, warning Abimelech to restore the woman to her husband and make restitution for the offense, and ask for intercession from Abraham the prophet. So again, Abraham traveled, journeyed towards the land of Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur. Then he sojourned in Gerar, Genesis chapter 20, verse 1. Oh, this is, I repeated that. Let me see that. What happened? So, we know that in chapter 20, he traveled and he met the king of Gerar, Abimelech. Again, he denies he is my sister. It's a repetition of what happening before. And so Abimelech took the wife into to his harem, but God intervened. Verse 6. Abraham told him that he was Abraham's wife. So in verse 7, God instructed Abimelech to restore the woman to Abraham. And so there is actually an instruction. So, in other words, in verse 8 to 16, Abimelech immediately obeyed God's instruction by restoring Abraham to his son, to his husband, and make a restitution to his couple, and brought them into great danger. So, yumaman na naman si Abraham. Okay, so anyway, chapter 21, that's the story of verse 20 about Abraham, Abimelech, and Sarai. In chapter 21, the promise is born. So when the Lord fulfilled his promise by providing Isaac, the child of promise, Abraham and Sarai responded by obediently circumcising him, praising the Lord, protecting him by casting out Ismael, pinalayas na siya Ismael, and making covenant at Beersheba with Abimelech, which allowed them to serve God in the land of promise. So that is the summary. So you can imagine how God, the promised, was fulfilled here. The promised seed. And so Abraham, Sarai, he has two sons, Sarah and Isaac. He has a son from Sarah, Isaac, and Hagar, Ismael. So both of them become, the descendant become numerous. And in fact, they become enemy, their descendants, enemies of Abimelech, the king of Gerar. God is be with you, swear an oath of friendship. Abraham said, your people stole my will. So ito yung will nila, no? So we have two subtitle here. So verses 1 to 21 of chapter 21, fulfillment of the seeds of the promise through the birth of Isaac, the chosen seed. He's the chosen, he's the elect. Abimelech testimony that God was Abraham, blessing him, verses 22 to 24. Chapter 22, here is the summary. God promise is God's, not Abraham. So it seems negative, because it is about the sacrifice of Isaac. In obedience to the commands of the Lord, Abraham took his beloved son to the land of Moriah in order to sacrifice him to the Lord. But because of Abraham's obedience, the angels of the Lord restrained him from making the sacrifice, and swore to bless him, and all which prompted the patriarch to commemorate the place of sacrifice as the Lord will provide. So here is a outline of that verse, chapter 22. God provide the test. God provide through faith. God provide the sacrifice. And remember that the angel stopped Abraham, and he provide the sacrifice. God provide the retrieve. God provides a substitute. God provides the blessings. So that is how chapter 22. So now it comes after this test that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. And he said, take now your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. In the Chronicle, then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord appealed to his father David. Now, so Moriah is very familiar place in the Old Testament. It is the place where God asked Abraham to offer his son. And it is also in the book of Chronicle, it is where the house of God was built. So Abraham rose early in the morning, as we heard that. 7 and 8, Esau spoke to Abraham and his father. Here am my son, and behold, the fire and the wood was here. But where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the offering, my son. So the two them walk on together. So he believed that his son will be resurrected. And that is what he believed, Abraham. Let me see that. So there's a comparison between Isaac and Jesus in the New Testament. So we are always told that the Old Testament is the shadow of things to come. Isaac is to be offered as offering to God. Jesus offered as sacrifice for the sin of the world. Isaac taken to the Mount Moriah outside the city of Jerusalem. Jesus taken to Golgotha outside the city of Jerusalem. Isaac carried the wood for the sacrifice up the mountain. Christ his own cross, for he is crucified up the mountain. Can you see how the Old Testament, he bring wood, but Christ also bring wood, this cross. Bound and laid on the altar. And he is here, Jesus nailed to the cross. Isaac, 3 days for Abraham and Isaac to travel to Moriah. So they traveled 3 days. Jesus, 3 days after his resurrection, Jesus rose from the dead. Chapter 22, verse 9 and 10. And they come to the place which God had told him, and Abraham built an altar there, and arranged the wood, and bound his son, and laid an altar on the top of the altar wood. And Abraham reached out to his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angels of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Behold, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not stretch out your hand against the lad, and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. So you see that in the cross, God gave his only son. But here, he withheld Abraham not to touch his only son. Verse 13, then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns, and Abraham went on, offered him up for the place to his son. And Abraham called the name of the place, the Lord will provide, Yeri, from the root word Raha, to see. As the Lord said to this day, in the mountain of the Lord will provide. You see in Isaiah chapter 53, verse 11, and the Lord, as the result of the anguish of his soul, he will see it. The word used in chapter 21, also used by Isaiah, Raha, to see, and be satisfied and be knowledge of righteous one. My servant will justify as me, and he will bear the iniquity. This is about the prophecy concerning the suffering of Christ. Isaiah chapter 53, verse 11. See here, the Lord will provide. So here in chapter 53, he will see the Lord will provide. Raha. Chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, since we have so great clouds of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance, the sin which so easily entangled us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing your eyes on Jesus. See, Raha, and the authors and the perfecters of faith, who was for the joy set before him, endured the cross, despised the shame, and sat down the right hand of the throne of God. That is from Isaiah chapter 53. So here is the summary. So we have now chapter 21 and 22. God's fulfilled his promises Isaac was born, Hagar and Ishmael was sent out, and Isaac was offered. The last text there. So chapter 22, the descendant, letter K, Abraham committed himself to God's promises, and the second part of chapter 22. Okay, so the descendant of Nahor, a telegram from home. So after Abraham gone to offer his son Isaac, he received a word from home that his brother Nahor had borne 12 children, 8 through his wife Micah, and 4 through his concubine Rima. That is in chapter 22, verses 22 to 24. So in chapter 23, the purchase of the cave of Machpelah. When Sarah, the wife of Abraham, died, Abraham purchased a family burial site in the land of Canaan from its owner, demonstrating his intention to remain in the place that God has promised. So you see, history actually, the land of Canaan was owned by Abraham. And so a little summary of this, verses 20 to 24, the informations of Abraham about his brother's descendant. Then chapter 23, verses 1 to 20, Abraham expected hope in the promise, in the fulfillments of the covenant promise. He purchased a parcel of land in Canaan to bury Sarah. So chapter 24, the divine provision for the continuation of the covenant promises through an elect seed, the marriage of Isaac to Rebekah. That is chapter 24. So chapter 23, verse 2 to 4, it told us about that Sarah died. And Abraham rose before his dead and spoke to the son of him, saying, I am the stranger and sojourner among you. Give me a burial site among you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. So the cave of Capella is a fair purchase, a legal deed, and a lasting possession, because the children of Israel will return that place. It is a place that God, through Abraham, purchased it. Chapter 24, verses 2 and 4, Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had the charge of all he owned, please place your hand under my thigh, and I will swear my Lord, by the Lord, the God of heaven and the Lord of earth, that you shall not take the wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I live. But you will go to my country and to my relatives, and take the wife for my son, Isaac. So that is the story. So Terah had 3 sons, as a review, Abraham, Nahor, and Hiram. The 3rd son died while Lot was still a child. That's why Abraham adopted Lot, or Lot. No? So Abraham has a son, Isaac, and Nahor, he has 12 children. No? And one of them is Rebekah and Laban. So this chapter 24 is introduce a romance motif, except of course with Jesus meet with. So everything here, they meet on sa ito, nagkita sila palagi sa itong incident to, nagkita sila sa balloon ng tubig. No? Rebecca heard of the one who shall be her husband. Jacob meets Rachel. Moses meets Zipporah. Ruth meets Boaz. In a water jar in Ruth chapter 2 verse 9. Jesus meets the Samaritan woman at the well. So nakita ay mga lahat ito, the man and woman meet doon sa balloon. No? So that's end our study for a while until we take chapter 24. So we finish until chapter 24. Next time we will finish as far as we can go. Maybe we will finish the descendant of, because next is chapter 23 or chapter 25 is the descendant of the Toledo of Isaac, the descendant of Isaac. What became of Isaac? Then we will have the study of chapter 32, no, to 35. So we are now on chapter the cycle now. So chapter 25. So chapter 26, the continuation through Isaac. No? So this is actually the story. So next time we will stay with the story of two descendants, no? Isaac and Jacob. And after that, another maybe two, no? We will study Isaac and Jacob. Then the following Monday is Joseph. Maybe we could finish Joseph. We just have just a selections of the passages that we need to read. No? So anyway, do you have any question? Nandiyan na Simon, no? Simon, nandan na sumagot yan sa inyo, no? Okay, do you have any question? So we have now almost, what time is now in your place? Almost
8:46, well.
It's almost, 8:46? Wow, meaning we are too fast, huh? Almost 1 hour and 15 minutes only. So maybe we can finish in one sitting from Isaac to Joseph, the whole chapter 20, is that chapter 25 to chapter 50 of the book of Genesis. By random, just read those texts. That is very important. Okay, so maybe you read 25 to chapter 50. so that we will have familiarity of what we are speaking here, of what we are studying.
Bro.Bert.
PENTATEUCH. Oh, ano ang tanong?
Bro.Bert.
Si Brad Ramon daw sasagot.
Sige,
Ito
ikaw.
ito pa, no?
Brother Ramon. Ikaw yung sumagot daw eh.
Itanong mo sa teacher natin.
Ano tanong mo?
Ako moderator dito. Ako moderator, anong tanong mo? Paabot ko. Anong tanong mo? Kasi ang pag-aaral nito is good for 1 year to eh. 1 year pa tayo matatapos dito. Kaya wag mo madaliin ha. Wala papasok pa yan si Brother Bert sa trabaho. Baka madisturbo mo. Hindi katulad ni Brother Melchor na hanggang alas 2 siya natutulog. O sige, tanong.
Ang tanong ko kasi sa Sodoma at Gomora, sinasabi ng Panginoon doon, sabihin mo sa akin kung may